Now this year you're chairing one of the 6 committees, major committees at the United Nations. The second committee, we've talked about a lot of issues today. Are there 2 or 3 others that you're dealing with? I know that committee has a broad agenda, but are there 2 or 3 other issues that you're dealing with that you'd like to share today?
Well, the 2 big issues that we dealt with on the second committee is, of course, post-2015, which is now, of course, dealt by two very capable co-facilitators. And the second, of course, is financing for development, which is at the basis of the post-2015 agenda, because you can have an agenda, you can have goals, you can select, what kind of policies you have to put in place in the next 15 years. But if you don't have the means of implementation, the resources, well, everything is going to be on paper, just on paper. So financing for development, the financing, the public aid of governments is important, but we are trying to concentrate also a little bit on innovative ways of financing development. And we are very interested in the role of private sector, foundation, what is called the philanthropic, institutions. There is a large amount of untapped resources there that are sitting, in the banks. They are idle. And we have promoted a couple of events at the UN, at the United Nations, to just reflect on this issue and to see how this new form of financing, social financing we call it, can be used in addition to public spending, of course, to increase the resources at the service of third world development.
Exactly. And you mentioned financing for development. FFD, there's a conference, major conference, I believe, next month in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And of course, they'll be dealing with these issues and coming up with specific recommendations. Is that correct?
It is correct, and I think the Secretary General rightly has asked all the world leaders to attend, and I'm very happy to report that Italy will be present. The Prime Minister of Italy, Matteo Renzi, has decided to attend this conference together with his African, Asian, and Latin America counterparts and European counterparts. As I said, it will be a crucial moment of the post-2015. We need a success in Addis Ababa. Success in terms of commitments, resource commitments. And I think it's important that all the traditional donor countries come with fresh ideas, fresh resources if possible, to commit for the next 15 years what is needed not to bring only countries out of underdevelopment, but especially, for example, in Africa, to untap the economic potential that is there and it's already ready to be tapped. So it's important not to talk only about the traditional development to the cooperation to development, but also now more and more in terms of economic growth.
Exactly, very true. And when I think back to 2000, we were talking about the Millennium Development Goals and now the Sustainable Development Goals that'll be kicking in 2016. How important was this? We look back, flashback, you weren't here, or you may have been here in another capacity, I'm not sure, but as you think back to 2000 when Secretary General Kofi Annan and the member states of the United Nations, Italy played a key role in that, developed the 8 Millennium Development Goals to reduce abject poverty by 50%, to promote universal primary school education, to empower women. How important was that at that whole concept to try to bring the world together, the NGOs, the private sector, to focus on these goals to achieve them?
It was very, very important. I think the MDGs, as the Millennium Development Goals, as they were called, were very important. Maybe not all of them have been reached completely, but certainly, even if it's 80% of the objectives that were set in 2000, a lot have been done, and an enormous amount of resources has been spent, and we see that especially in Africa, as I said before, because Africa is clearly showing signs of, going to a next phase, a new phase of economic industrial development, which is what is needed. Not only, giving humanitarian or emergency aid for hunger or anything like that. You have to help them pass through the pre-industrialization phase. This is really development. And the private sector, you mentioned the partnerships. This is, I think, the biggest idea the UN has promoted in the last 10 years. And this is the future. I mean, private sector has to step in.
Exactly. They have the largest wallet, without a doubt. They have more money,
Yeah.
and they have the resources to do it, whereas the governments are limited to some degree because they just aren't that large. As you look into the future with the Sustainable Development Goals, do you see, or what do you see as some of the challenges to implementing them and to bring the parties together to get everybody working on them and trying to achieve them over the next 15 years?
Well, as I said, probably the big issue will be decreasing public spending, because, we are facing, let's face it, we are facing in Europe and elsewhere some budget constraints. So the challenge, a big challenge will be first to mobilize private resources. ODA will remain the core funding for development, of course, but this will be crucial. Private enterprises should more and more understand that it is in their interest to maybe forego a little bit of the profits that it can in these countries, and to help them create a new industrial environment, which will, of course, in turn be beneficial for all the global economic outlook. And the second, of course, will be the capacity of the UN, I think, to keep the focus on this economic growth of developing countries while we are confronted with new threats. As I said before, terrorism, in Africa and elsewhere is a major concern because it could very well derail our agenda for development. And that's something that we have to be very careful about.